New CCI Uppercut in 22 Magnum or 22 WMR. So the 22 long rifle version of the Uppercut has been out for some time, but CCI now offers a 22 WMR version of the CCI Uppercut. Basically, they are jacketed hollow point defensive cartridges here. So I'm going to test the new CCI Uppercut 22 mag compared to the 22 LR. So our 22 LR is a 32 grain rated at 950 feet per second, and our 22 WMR is a 40 grain rated at 1050 feet per second. When I first saw this Uppercut, I was looking at the photos of it and I thought maybe that's a repackaged gold dot, because the the CCI company and Spear company are sister companies. Sometimes they use different components of each. And the gold dot actually says CCI in the bottom of the cartridge. But I took a really close look at these. These are definitely not gold dots. They are their own new projectile. So this truly is a new offering for 22 WMR for handgun defense. We don't see a whole lot of that out nowadays. So I'm going to test these, and I'm going to test the 22 LR. I've tested it in the past, but I want to compare it to the new 22 WMR. I'm going to test the 22 LR from our Taurus TX22 with a 4.1 inch barrel, and then the 22 Magnum I am going to test from my Ruger LCR with a 3-inch barrel. Reason why I'm doing that is because 22 Magnum is more of a revolver cartridge, so I'm always going to use a revolver to test that, even though semi-auto pistols exist in it. It really is more of a revolver cartridge. As we're a 22 long rifle, either or. But you might say, well, that's not a fair comparison. But about a 4-inch semi-auto, the chamber is included in that measurement. And when you look at a 3-inch revolver, the chamber is not included in that measurement. So you actually have just a hair more bullet travel out of the revolver than what you do out of that semi-automatic pistol. So pretty much both will get about 3 inches of barrel travel. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic test. So we're going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what our best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point or anything like that. Then I'll move on to more of our real world simulation. 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. After that, we'll have a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that's going to represent hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent back ribs. Clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in an actual living target. So we're really trying to represent here 9.5 inches of a target with ribs in there. So after the ballistics gel test, we are going to shoot at the steel target, see what kind of practical accuracy I get with these. So let's get started with this test. First up, we have our 22 long rifle, 32 grain jacketed hollow point. We are rated at 950 feet per second. Let's see how close I get to that 950 out of my Taurus TX22 with a 4.1 inch barrel. $1,020. $1,031. $1,008. $989. $998. $1020. $1021. $985. All right, so the chronograph's having an issue picking up some of those for some reason, so I fired a bunch through there. This is just 22 long rifle. I don't know what the issue is today. I set it up and it was running with no errors prior to running this. So our 22 Magnum, we are rated at 1,050 feet per second. I don't know the barrel length. Let's see how I get in my LCR here. I'm going to have to shoot closer to the sensors, I think. Huh. Weird. All right, let's try that again with the lights and the shades up. 1322. 1305. 1306. Let me run a few more. Try to get some more reads. 1362. 1317. 1238. 1269. 1353. So not particularly consistent there with the velocity averages I'm getting, but definitely way above the rate of velocity out of a 3-inch barrel. So I'm not sure what barrel length they're using to get only 1,050 feet per second when I'm getting around 1,300 out of just a 3-inch barrel. So pretty impressive there for its velocity. So let's hit our Ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, our first shot in the plain clear Ballistics. No denim in the way to clog a hollow point. No rib simulation to slow down penetration. Let's see what we get with our 22 long rifle uppercut. All right. Let's see how our 22 Magnum compares. Let's go take a look. All right, so the first thing I noticed right away was when I shot that 22 Magnum, just a massive amount of unburnt powder flakes and stuff like that hit the front of that block. Our 22 long rifle on the bottom, our 22 Magnum on top, significant difference there. So what we got going on here with our 22 long rifle, not a ton of damage, but not too bad overall. I cannot tell if that is expanded by looking at this view right here, but we went right to 11 3/4 inches of penetration. The camera parallax from where this camera sits will make it look like it is maybe 12.5 inches, but from a straight on view, we're at 11 3/4. Our 22 WMR, we're only at 11 inches even. So a little bit subpar penetration. However, you know, sometimes you can get over expansion, which will lower, you know, that penetration. And, you know, fabric will lower that expansion threshold. And in the real world, those generally fabric that people are wearing. So let's put on our denim, put in our rib simulation and see how these compare in our real world simulation. All right, a real world simulation, 4 layers of denim, 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and then another 1/4 inch MDF to represent hitting back ribs. So let's see what we get with our 22 long rifle uppercut. All right. Hit that with our 22 Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, so definitely a difference in performance here between our 22 long rifle and our 22 Magnum. With our 22 long rifle, it's actually reversed. We had a little bit less penetration with our 22 long rifle and no expansion. But with our 22 Magnum, we had more penetration and still some expansion. So what we got going on here with our 22 long rifle is we're just shy of 11 inches with no expansion. Our 22 Magnum, we went to about 12 1/8 inches of penetration with our 22 Magnum and still some expansion. So I'm going to say, you know, when we're talking a legit self-defense cartridge, when you're trying to do some of the stuff that centerfire cartridges will do, our 22 Magnum is just barely there. It's kind of doing it. It's in the game with the rest of, you know, defensive cartridges. like 9mm and 380 and whatnot. As where our 22 long rifle, it just doesn't have enough power to compete here. So it's just not quite a good defensive cartridge overall. But our 22 Magnum just barely kind of meets that minimum penetration and still getting some expansion. So yeah, I'd say our 22 Magnum's definitely a bit better here. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them. Then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 22 long rifle and our 22 Magnum. So here's the expansion with our 22 long rifle uppercut. It's not terrible. Looks consistent through plain gel. Looks pretty good. And when we look at our 22 Magnum, yeah, we have all kinds of just mushrooming there. So that really fragmented against that plain gel, kind of overexpanded, which limited its penetration quite a bit. But pretty good overall. Now, I want to show our MDF here. Impact with our 22 long rifle and with our 22 Magnum. So we're definitely expanding before we hit this with our 22 Magnum, which I find to be a really beneficial thing because, you know, in my study of, you know, real world shootings, it does look like rounds that are very, the most effective of the rounds in the 90 percentile. When I test those, they expand before hitting this rib simulation. So to me, that tells me a lot, but not everybody sees it that way. So our 22 long rifle and our 22 Magnum over here. So through our real world simulation, our 22 long rifle failed to expand. And that's going to be on account of that denim alone, because, you know, when we hit this, we didn't see any extra size going on there. So that means that denim prevented that from expanding right away. Once in a while, you'll see rounds that do expand after they go through the MDF, but it's relatively rare with really fast rounds. Our 22 Magnum going through our real world simulation, this changed up quite a bit here, where we just lowered that expansion threshold just enough to really do really well, not over fragment. So what we're seeing is immediate energy dump and expansion through denim with our 22 Magnum, then fully expanded going through the rib simulation and then penetrating to about 12 inches. So honestly, pretty good with our 22 Magnum. As we're with our 22 long rifle, that's kind of subpar. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this round here, and what they'll say is, well, it doesn't expand in clear ballistics. You have to use organic gel. But can you imagine if I tested ammo like 9mm and I test, you know, 99 rounds and they all expand in this, and then I test one and it fails to expand at all, and the manufacturers or any other people come out and be like, well, you used the wrong gel. Now, you wouldn't be buying that, and I'm not buying that for the 22 long rifle either. If other stuff can do well in it, this should do well also, unless the ammo is not particularly effective, and that's kind of what I'm seeing here with this. So interesting. That's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so I'm just going to pull up and get a front sight picture and fire off as fast as I think I can hit the target, and see if there's a big difference for me between 22 long rifle and 22 Magnum. Every time I do this thing, a lot of people will be like, well, that's not fair. This is a 22 Magnum revolver, and you should be using a semi-automatic pistol. But honestly, to me, 22 Magnum is a revolver cartridge, because when you go to those pistols that are semi-auto pistols that are in 22 Magnum, they're all bigger than a typical 9mm full-size pistol. So that kind of defeats the purpose. You have to have this really big pistol to fire off something like that. As where for a long time, 22 Magnum has come in very concealable revolvers, and this is kind of even big for a 22 Magnum. A lot of the revolvers, you know, from Smith & Wesson are a lot smaller, 2-inch barrels, and there's a 2-inch barrel version of this. So when I'm using a revolver, I mean, that's a legit way to test that. Now, 22 long rifle, yeah, I could have used a revolver in that, but I don't have one like that. I decided to go with the semi-auto pistol just because, you know, my way of thinking is with 22 long rifle, you're going to want as much capacity as possible if you're really going to use it as a defensive option. So that's why I chose this as my test gun for defensive 22 long rifle. So 14 yards from the target, I'm just going to get a front sight picture, see how these feel for me. So those are hitting a little bit to the low right for me. That's probably just me, just the way I'm looking at those sights. I don't shoot this pistol very often. 22 Magnum, see what this does. Not as good of group, obviously. I'm firing those off pretty quickly, and definitely a lot more muzzle jump. So really the big difference here is with a 22 Magnum revolver, there's a horrendous trigger pull on all of them. And the recoil isn't great, but the muzzle jump can be kind of comparable to maybe a 380 or something like that. So it takes just a little bit of skill to be able to shoot the 22 Magnum effectively, as where the 22 long rifle, it takes almost no effort to be able to be effective with it. So this is really all I need to know for this ammo. So I'm going to back up to 75 yards just for fun to see if I can hit the target. I love doing that. You know, it's not really a thing that's needed to be done in this test, but I think it's fun. So let me do that. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. I have to really emphasize that, because if I don't, people get, I don't know why, but people get mad that I'm telling people to train from this distance. That's not what I'm saying. I just think it's a challenge and it's fun. So 22 long rifle uppercut. I aim center mass and see where these hit. So those are hitting kind of low, so I'm gonna have to aim probably at the shoulder area on that silhouette. All right, so I do think they are continuing to impact to the right like they were up close for me when I was rapid firing them, because I felt like they maybe were going right, and I aimed off the target to the left, and then I started hearing a lot louder ring. So they are shooting a little bit to the right for me. So I was getting a little bit too confident there and fired them kind of fast. I probably could have hit all those once I knew where to aim, but I was firing them kind of quickly. 22 Magnum. This is always a challenge because it's hard for me to tell where I'm hitting. Let me try one single action, see if I can figure out where this is going. I think this may be shooting high. I'm not even sure where those are hitting, if I'm making any hits at all. I'm going to be honest. You know, they travel so quickly, and the impact is not nearly as hard as center fire, so it's often very difficult for me to know if I'm actually hitting or missing. And then I can't see the impacts in the dirt either. Alright, so I'm seeing a consistent thing. I'm aiming kind of center low on that silhouette, and I'm seeing impacts that are 4 or 5 feet above the target. So I'm going to aim below the target at the post. That one hit really far to the right. Huh. Those are all over the place for me. You know, I'm aiming in the same spot and I'm seeing some hit below the target and some hitting way above the target. There's about 12-foot variance in where they're hitting. That parallax of that camera will condense everything on that hill. You know, that hill is 60 foot tall, but that camera down there will make it seem like it's, I don't know, 20 foot tall. So it condenses everything to 3 times smaller, tighter of a distance. So if I'm hitting 10 feet apart, that downrange camera will make it look like I'm hitting 3 feet apart. It's a weird thing like that, but I'll keep going with this, see if I can dial these in. That was weird. Again, I hit sometimes and then I saw one hit 10 feet below the target. That is really, really odd. You know, why is it doing that? It's not very consistent at distance for me. Again, I made several hits, and then I saw one hit probably 15 feet below the target. It was actually out of the range of the camera view, in front of the camera down there. That's weird. Above the target. So, yeah, that's another reason why I do these long-range tests. I mean, yes, a lot of times my own personal skill comes into play and I could pull shots all over. However, I know that my abilities to shoot downrange, generally I can keep it in that silhouette size. So when I see impacts that are a good 20 foot away from each other in various directions, that says something's a little bit odd going on there. And that's kind of why I do these tests, because if I see an ammo that looks really, really impressive, I like to then up the ante. Well, what can it do now? What can it do now? And I'll back it up and see, well, is its accuracy going to continue on being great, you know, along with its terminal ballistics? And sometimes this happens where I see really weird things at distance, and I'm seeing that here. So, you know, as far as its terminal ballistics go, what we're seeing here is that the 22 long rifle isn't great. Honestly, there's no reason to use that. You might as well just use a lead round nose, because you're, at the end of the day, what's happening is you're getting just barely 12 inches of penetration through the rib simulation, and really any ammo is going to do that. On the flip side of that, though, it's also, it seems to be a cleaner shooting ammo. It is a hollow point, so it is more accurate at distance. And it's going to deform a little bit less against ribs. So in that aspect, maybe it's better than a lead round nose, but not by a lot. This 22 Magnum actually performed really well. I've tested like Federal Punch, and multiple times I've tested that. I've got failures to get expansion with that. And that's supposed to be like the top of the line, you know, 22 Magnum defensive cartridge. And I've seen kind of the same thing here and there with Gold Dot and Critical Defense. I've tested those a few times. And I do remember, you know, I think with the Gold Dot I had some issues where I got under penetration and maybe lack of expansion. I saw kind of stuff, you know, on the border of that with Critical Defense as well. But with this, at least with our first test, the terminal ballistics seemed really, really good. So as far as the terminal ballistics go, this looks promising. I'm going to say, at least at this point, it looks better than the rest of the 22 Magnum defensive cartridges out there. But it is what it is. Not bad performance with our 22 Magnum, except for its accuracy, and with the 22 long rifle, not great. So very interesting. That's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.